Okay, I think I've let everybody in who's waiting, so we'll get started as you're answering that. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Jennifer Conway, President and CEO of Broken Arrow Chamber of Commerce. We're incredibly excited to have Bill Fournette from the Persimmon Group with us today. It's one of my favorite. Every time I walk away with conversation with Bill, we were getting to chat for a few minutes beforehand and already inspired and thinking vision and long term. And I think that's the goal as we go through this is looking and focusing on tomorrow and doing the right decisions today. So excited to get it started really quick. Would thank our sponsors. And if I have a staff member who's logged in as me, I need them to log out as the Broken Arrow Chamber. I got one who did. Thank you to our sponsors today, and that is, can everyone see the poll still? Is the poll there? Did it go away? Thank you to our sponsors, and we'll go over that really quick. GTR Media Group, IBT, Tulsa Tech, Tulsa Drillers, and Southwestern Payroll. And then we've got Arrow Exterminators Group, Hightower Business Solutions, AVP Bank, and last, but that should be it. So we're so thankful for our small business champions as well as the Persimmon Group. So today's topic, Selling Through the Chaos with Bill Fournette. He's the CEO of Tulsa-based award-winning management consulting firm, the Persimmon Group, and he helps leaders thrive in the age of disruption, which I would say that could define us right now. 25 years of leading successful teams through any situation, and he's the foundation for his Lead for Tomorrow program. He's known for his optimistic view of disruption, and Bill is going to help us stay ahead of finding opportunity in times of uncertainty, advising that change is constant, but it does not have to be chaos. So we're super excited to have you. And for one last stop before we get started, want to do a plug for our next ones. Tomorrow we have resources for workforce resiliency, and that's really going to focus on HR issues and employment law risks, which I know a lot of business owners and leaders are facing some questions they've never had to before, so it'll be a great opportunity to get involved. And then next week, 11 steps to help your business thrive and strive, survive and thrive. And then a second part of resources for workforce resiliency, and that's going to be focusing on frequent asked questions and discussion with workforce personnel, specifically people from the unemployment office, as from the state as well as others. So it'll be a great time to really kind of dig into some questions specifically to you that you may be facing to help you navigate it. Oftentimes small businesses don't have access to an HR professional. And we also have a lot of good chamber members if you need to be referred to some groups. So that is, I'm going to let Bill take over from here on the slides. This is going to be interactive. So as you saw, did you see the poll, Bill? Is it there still?
It was there, and then after he answered, I think it was gone. Do you have in the poll, usually it'll give you an option to say share the results. Do you see that?
Unfortunately, I have a staff member that signed in.
I know, I had the same issue. It's a Zoom.
Who on the call is the staff member that signed in under that number? Can you unmute yourself and tell us, and can you share the poll?
Jennifer, they left the call and it's now showing that you are the host, so you should have that ability.
Well, unfortunately that made the poll go away, so let me see if I can relaunch that poll.
Jennifer, that's okay. I was going to ask, as you saw any of the results, did you see kind of where we were landing on that one from a poll?
Most everybody it was strong working remotely.
Good. Okay, awesome. It kind of just gives me a sense for everyone. Welcome. I'm Bill Fournette with Persimmon, and I want this, as Jennifer said, I want this to be as useful as possible and helpful and valuable. So if you've got questions or challenges that are going on, feel free to bring some of those into the chat. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of some of the things we've been seeing and guiding a lot of companies around on leaders over the last, now for me, almost 5 weeks. So this is my 5th week of working remotely. My team has been remote for 4 weeks. And so if you've got questions or challenges, go ahead and let me know those in the chat. I'm going to put a question in there as well right now for everyone, which is really, what is one of the top challenges that you have with your team today? as we've all had to adjust so quickly. It's been amazing. It's also been, in a positive side, incredible to see how many companies and teams have figured out how to adapt to this disruption to try to keep themselves as a team or as a business intact, or to figure out this adjustment. And we keep getting hit with new things. You know, first it was just shifting off site, then it was, and maybe quarantining, then it was school, right? Trying to figure out how do we keep our kids busy, then get them engaged on online learning. And now we're all trying to figure out kind of where this normal is setting in. And so what I've been seeing this week, especially, and maybe for the last half of last week, companies and teams have really settled into the operational aspect of this, where for the preceding 3 weeks, every company was kind of in a different place. Some had moved quickly into going remote. Some were still trying to figure out what the effect would be and how do they run their business and what do they do between their employees, their operations, their customers. All wrestling with that, creating a lot of disruption and churn. And now it's starting to settle down a bit more. People are realizing, hey, we're going to be a good 2 to 6 weeks more of this probably going on, depending on who you listen to and what the models show. And they're kind of starting to normalize some business aspects on that. So thank you for sharing some of these that I've got. See, Bethany already has responded to one. I'm going to give a high level, and I'm going to come back to some of these questions as well. I'm going to put my screen up, and you all will get these slides available. But I've been getting a lot of questions. I actually also hold a daily kind of what I call a daily call. It's a 12:30 call every day for 30 minutes that's been kind of addressing some of the challenges, because we're all trying to figure out how do we adjust in this quote new normal. What does it look like, and how do I keep my team intact? So you should be able to see my screen now. Let's see. Oops. Yep. And what I want to start off first with, one of the guidance I've been giving for leaders of any size team or organization is I want you to kind of think about 3 thought streams. And these are like buckets that you're trying to put some of your decisions and questions in, as opposed to sort of just having to react to so many different things. And these 3 thought streams, I'm going to hit all 3 of these pretty quick, but the first one focuses on, are we getting and making decisions with as good of data or information as we can? And what I mean by that is when you go back 3-4 weeks ago, and all of this started becoming known, and we started seeing the shift that was going on into moving remote, a lot of businesses were just reacting. They were reacting to, first, the question of how do I get people remotely as fast as possible? But secondly, they're trying to think about what's the data that I need. And there was a lot of data being thrown around. And the question was, is it valid? And so the key here that you see, and you see here at the graphic at the bottom, is you've got all these forces coming at you, your customers, your external forces like the government, the health officials, and employees. And you're trying to bring all that into a funnel and figure out what's valid, can I go get more information around? I have time to go get information around, and what do I need to go make a decision on now? The best advice I have for you on that one is you want to really focus with your team about, don't just bring me information. Give me what I call context. Give me some meaning around that. Don't just tell me the customer's upset. Say the customer is upset because they said this or did this action. That will enable you as a leader to better prioritize where you feel you need to be spending your time and energy, and what is an urgent thing, meaning that it's important, plus time, meaning it's time sensitive, and what maybe is more around the peripheral. And organizations did a pretty good job of this, of getting down to their core essential services and businesses fast and functions, and then saying, okay, I'm going to deal with those first, then I'm going to start dealing with my other peripheral areas. The second one is, based on that information, what short-term decisions do you need to make? And the challenge I see is we all had to make short-term decisions. As you're going through any crisis, you've got to act pretty quickly. The question is, are you yo-yoing your team? Are you yo-yoing your company? And are you reacting again back to information or emotion, as opposed to something I could go get validation on? So you're going to make short-term decisions. The key here is, are you reflecting on those periodically to say, do I need to adjust my tact? I go back 4 weeks ago, and decisions that we were making then that were good for that situation are not the same decisions necessarily I need to be making now. Part of that's because what I call there's a rhythm, and the rhythm is the speed at which your team is working and meeting. It's the patterns, and you're trying to slow some of that rhythm down as you start to come out of a crisis. And my last one, and then my last thought stream here, is the one that I actually see organizations miss the most. as we're going through this, there are going to be changes in the way we work and the way we operate as a society. Do we know what those are right now? I don't. Can we start to see some things here and there? Sure, maybe, but we don't know. There's not been enough time to let us know. And so my advice here is for leadership to keep their ear to the ground, to be watching where are some of these trends going to shift. I mean, look at the number of restaurants that have already shifted into some sort of a to-go ordering approach because they needed to maintain viability as best they could, but they couldn't have patrons sitting in their restaurants. There's going to be some shifts that are going to occur that may come out and stay or last in our society or our economy, but it's too early to tell. So just watch for some of those and then ask yourself as you start to hear some of those trends, and your employees, by the way, are one of the best places to start to hear some of that feedback coming in. When that happens, then you can start to think about where do I want to make opportunity or take opportunities to go forwards. So as we go through that, I want to look at a couple of recommendations that I've been advising around this initial start, and then I'm gonna bring in some questions, and I know, Jennifer, you've got some as well. 3 actions for you to consider today. First is, and companies have been doing a really good job of this, is focus on connection and support. Your employees are number one. And I was advising that to companies across the board. We couldn't deal with the questions of the customer, the economy, the operations. For the first 2 weeks, it just needed to make sure your people were okay, because in a crisis, and then what's amazing about this one is it's affecting everyone. It's not just one sector. It's not just the oil and gas or just the manufacturing sector. It's everyone. And it came so fast. And so the first thing is going to be to remember, you're going to be judged less so on the specific actions that occur over the next few weeks, and more so on how you led your team and how the team feels coming out of this. That's what's going to make this, because it creates the cohesion, it creates the feeling of, hey, we've got each other's back, how are we working with each other? So connection and support around making sure people are safe, but also recognizing there's a lot of guilt for those that may come down with COVID, and to make sure that how they feel they're going to be engaged. I'm doing some online social interaction and meetups. Those are all great. My team has a Friday at 4 o'clock happy hour where everybody is in their remote environments. We're all in a Zoom call. We play some games like Fibbage and some things like that you can play online, and we have our beverage of choice. Finding some ways of creating some social interactions. And then lastly is a big one that a lot of leaders sometimes miss, especially when we go into a virtual environment, is doing some of those Q&A sessions. It can be the entire company, or it can be with functions or departments of that you could have. So having some of those conversations with them that allows for that Q&A, because when team members feel that they can engage with leadership in questions and answers, it really gives them a sense of community and a sense of care. Second one is, how do we operate? And the biggest thing on operating, and if you haven't done this, I would consider it, especially if you're still in the transitioning stage, is establish team rhythms. And one of the best ways of doing this is creating what I call stand-up calls. You can do this company-wide. If you're a large organization, you could do this within a manager's area if they want as well. The frequency is kind of dependent upon how quickly are you moving. More change, higher frequency. Slowing the rhythm down, you can start to reduce the frequency. What these stand-up calls are, and I had this with my team, I have one every morning for 15 minutes. It's the entire team. And it is to really follow this kind of agenda that we have here, which is it's where information can be pushed to the entire base of whoever it is in that call. So if it's the all hands call, it's the entire employee base. If it's a manager with their team, it's just their team. You're pushing some information, could be an update. The reason this is powerful is because you can't assume that everybody's going to check their email or receive a text or a chat, and there's so many channels coming at us when you're in a remote environment. This allows you to go through all your levels of command and make sure that everyone in your organization understands something that was important that you needed to share with them. The second is getting into any needs that they may have. If it's an all hands meeting, larger organizations, it may just be where your leadership team is bringing in some of those needs and sharing them on the call. And then asking if there's any issues or risks. And this is great because what you're also sharing and showing to your employees is a sense of transparency of decision making. The reason that's important is because frontline employees, especially in remote environments, can't see and hear what's going on with the leadership sometimes. And if they hear the way you're thinking, the questions you're asking, they will do better at bringing you information from the front lines. And that's very important when you're in this disparate, separated environment. And then lastly is sharing lessons and insights. That's really powerful. It allows you to say, we learned something in this one situation, and I can quickly share it across my organization to apply that learning fast. My last one that I want to share with you is around just decision making for my 3 actions. The thing I would challenge you is when we go into heightened uncertainty, not knowing what's coming next, a lot of leaders, I feel, make the mistake of thinking that they have to have all of the answers. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to have the sort of what the next step is, or start to know the plan to move towards getting some of those answers or responding to them if you don't have control. And so in this example, I just want to show a really simple practice. It's what's used in the military. I'm a huge fan of this. And that says, think in terms of things being a trigger and an option. A trigger could be a decision, it could be an action, it could be a piece of information or intel. The options is what you're trying to play out is, what are my potential options if this happened? So for example, let's say that, as we saw, that they reduced everything down from social distancing and asked for all non-essential businesses to close, and at least for serving, say, patrons. So I'm going to use the restaurants as an example. At that moment, I could say, what are my options? My optimistic approach, I'm going to flip into to-go orders, and I'm going to be able to maintain my current staff. I'm going to be able to provide work for my customers or services to my customers, and I'm going to get all my food supplies, and everything's going to be good. I'm going to be able to operate just now in a to-go kind of or delivery model. My pessimistic is my food suppliers stopped delivering or can't deliver. My margins were pretty low, and therefore I've got to just completely shut down. And I can work that plan. And my realistic may say, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to see a cut in my business because the amount of to-go or pickup orders isn't going to be as high. So I'm going to need to adjust or work with my staff and figure out how do I do that, in addition to ensure that I'm making sure I'm supporting all of the health aspects of this. In that case, I'm saying I've got 3 options at least that I could go work. I don't need to have a detailed plan for every one, but I'm thinking at that level. And that's one of the misses that I see a lot of times inside of teams is we wait till the problem, then we react to it. Instead, start thinking ahead. If that happens, if X happens, what is the optimistic, pessimistic, and realistic potential outcomes and next steps that we would need to take? And that will help you and your team be better prepared when that event may happen. You already have a general idea of how you wanted to approach it, and it creates alignment when you're going through there. So with that, I'm going to just flip it over to a few questions. Jennifer, if we have any questions in the chat, or if you've got any that you want to raise up, we can go from there.
Yeah, I want to encourage everybody, again, if Bill's asked, what is your top challenge with your team today? I've got a couple of good comments in there, and we even have one member helping out another with an answer. So great connectivity there, but I encourage you to think about that and type that in. But Bill, I want to ask you out of the gate, you know, I know you're dealing with a lot of businesses. You've been working 24/7 and responding this and helping business navigate that. So can you tell us what you're hearing from companies and how they're responding and adapting to this crisis?
Yeah, so it really kind of went all over the map in the first week or two. I had some companies that I'll give you one example. I had a company that was their senior leadership. This is a larger company. Their leadership team decided before there was any direction of saying we needed to work remote, to actually shift themselves remote, even though not all of them agreed to do so. And they did it so they could test it out amongst themselves and to try to set the example, because they felt like that was coming. They are way ahead of the curve. They are doing all hands meetings with over 200 employees, almost I think it's on a twice a week basis. They're operating, and they've shifted most of their operations where they can into remote, but they have an entire field team as well that has to be out in the field. They're doing construction work, and therefore they have to be there. And the challenge for those, where you kind of have this hybrid, I can move some things remote, and I got to have some physical presence. The one thing I'm hearing around companies in general is that they're doing with physical workers, they're running the range from either embedding them into a location, So I have some oil and gas clients that are actually putting people onto sites and putting them on 30-day tours of duty, if you will, kind of like you would see in the military, and then they'll rotate them out where they're housing them on site. They're not going home or anything. The second that I have is a lot of groups that are what they're doing is they're splitting their teams into shifts. So you take a team as a whole, let's say there's 4 people in that team, and you break them into two shifts. Shift 1 may run for 14 days, while the other shift is working from home and doing what they can to support them or another aspect of the business. Shift 2 then swaps out after 14 days. And then lastly is those that have to have people in different job sites, et cetera, is they're creating and at least keeping them as cohorts or intact units that say that they're not moving people between the units. So if one unit has somebody who comes down with the virus, that unit shuts down. You don't backfill them with somebody else from another unit. Because the thing about the virus, okay, as I've watched, listened to the health officials, really studied this even prior of looking at from I love history, viruses don't care about your boundaries. Viruses don't care where you live. Viruses just care about human contact. And so you're trying to minimize is how do I mitigate that risk of my business? On the last side, what I would say is, I've started to see a lot of these companies stabilize. There are some companies, some industries that just either between where they were operationally or the type of business that they had, they literally have to stop for this period of time. And that's the hardest group to try to work and figure out, because they're also looking at what do I have from the government as it relates to the payroll protection program, which, by the way, SBA, they and the banks, I'm just so impressed with how quickly they have responded to this. I know it's a little messy, but they had nothing in place for this really at all. And so I'm just impressed by that. But that's the hardest group. So where we're at now is I'm seeing a lot of kind of people operationalize and stabilize and see where this is where I'm going to be. Whatever this place is right now, this is where I'm going to be for the next 2 to 4 to 6 weeks.
So along that line, I think, one of our questions in this chat box alludes to that, and Bill and I were talking about this before, is it is those people that we cannot, chambers are known for bringing people together, right? We bring people in the same room. That's the thing we champion. We have Chad, who says he's a scuba operator, and the primary service he provides is in-person water training. What are you saying to those people, or maybe in connecting with someone, how to reinvent themselves or pivot that would provide another level of service that they wouldn't already have?
No, that's a great point. So I want to hit a couple of things, including Chad's comment in there. So I'm going to give a quick example that I saw, at least here also, even here in Tulsa, that I just thought was ironic. A lot of companies are having to look at how they innovate for the short term, and some of those innovations may last for the long term. And I'll show you what one of those is. So this is White River Fish Market. Many of you all probably know this, okay, up in North Tulsa. They posted this. This was not yesterday, by the way. So don't run down there because if they have toilet paper. But this was at the end of last week. And I thought that was great. They were trying to figure out a way of letting people know, first of all, we're here. Second of all, come get some seafood. And by the way, we stocked up on toilet paper for you. That's a way of just trying to say, I want to get out to my market and say, I've got some additional things for you. Here's what I've seen for those that were really in person, and specifically to kind of Chad's question, is that I saw this great example yesterday. Billie Jean King, the tennis player. Everybody remembers Billie Jean King. Some of us do. Some of you have no idea. She was a professional tennis player, famous around the world. She's been doing online teaching and training. And my advice would be, if you take something that you're doing physically, even scuba, okay, that what can you bring in from your background or expertise that may not be explicitly of knowing, you're not going to have somebody in the water at that point. What can you do to do 2 things? Number 1, try to create a level of interaction with people who you have been interacting with, and maybe you have been in your classes or been in your business before. This is where I'm seeing things like a lot of the yoga rooms have stood up yoga training. Tulsa Ballet is doing actual teaching for their students remotely. Look at that. How do you create that level of community that you still had at some level? The second is go back to what your strengths are, whether it's both in a skill or in just what you were focusing on, and bring that into some sort of an online interaction like a Zoom or using Facebook Live or Teams. With my team, when this happened, I mean, we shifted over immediately a little over 4 weeks ago. We started doing these free daily calls, 30 minutes, just trying to get people together. And the reason we did that was because it was important to have community with people who have been our customers and clients, but also expand that to people who haven't been. Just bring them together because we're all struggling trying to figure out how to remove this and change. That has been huge for us in the sense of not just meeting some new people all over the country, by the way, but also just getting some engagement and ideas. And so my advice on that would be is if you're one of those who my core business can't be delivered physically, try to step back from it and say, outside of just the specifics of what you were delivering, what are some of the strengths that you have that you could shift over? Last one I'll leave for Chad as well as a consideration. I do a lot of backpacking and outdoor stuff. So going into some of those outfitters and interacting with them, they're closed. So what a lot of them are doing now is they're actually shifting over and starting to do things like gear, how to look at your gear and some demonstrations. They're doing some exercise of, hey, here's some ways to keep fit, and they'll record it and then you could download it afterwards. You may not get revenue off of some of those things, but what you are doing is you're building that brand pay off as we come out of this as well.
That's got a follow-up question. Chad, do you want to ask that real quick?
Sure.
Oh, I think you have to. Oh, there we go.
You go, Chad.
I appreciate you guys having me. This has been the only chamber that's reached out to us, and I know that Jason has known that we're hoping to maybe move to Broken Arrow in the future, so we're remaining optimistic. But yeah, what I was going to say is what we've decided to do are weekly live feeds where we're both trying to focus on answering the questions for people whenever we do get on the other side of this and they decide that when their trips have been canceled, they're going to spend that money on doing some extracurricular things. So we're trying to answer those questions for them online, so that way the process is a little bit more streamlined for them whenever they do decide to come in after. And then also, like you mentioned, we're trying to focus on basically catering to our base and doing weekly live feeds, so that way people can kind of just get together and talk scuba and ask questions and that kind of thing. And while it's not bringing in revenue right now, we did a live feed on Friday, and I think it's already had somewhere around 1,500 views or whatever. So hopefully what that will translate to is when we do get on the other side, people are then trying to get out and go do the business with us that they would have been doing otherwise.
That's outstanding, and I think you're going absolutely down the right path. You know, what's interesting is, I said earlier, we're not going to know what comes out of this, right? As far as what's going to last or change in the way we work or live. I think, though, that what's one of the things I've seen that is going to come out of this is that when I've watched this with education and I've watched this with companies so far, and even with my own family, when this happened and as it's happened, you really narrow down to what's most important to you. You get down to these core essential, not just services, but relationships or learnings and interactions. And so because of that, I actually think it's going to help strengthen those companies and organizations that are trying to keep some level of community and engagement, even though they may not be, like you said, bringing revenue in. But just by doing that weekly, that's a great example of keeping it, because that is where, you know, people are going to come back. They're going to come back. They're going to want to scuba. They're going to want to travel. And you're just building that base that says, we're here. We're trying to provide value and help for you, and a little bit of change from the monotony, you know, of working remotely kind of things. That's outstanding. With that, Jennifer, I want to share real quick just one example, and I love this book called Change by Design. As we start to settle and come out, there's going to be this question that says, where should I innovate or find new opportunities? And to that end, I love this little 4-quadrant, because what this 4-quadrant essentially says is, where are my ideas coming that could help me have more opportunity as I'm coming out of this disruption? And I just want to show this to you very quickly and use Uber as an example. So everybody's familiar with Uber. What you're trying to look at is, as ideas come up from yourself or your team, which of these 4 boxes do they land in? So when Uber came out itself, it was revolutionary. What revolutionary means is something that kind of hasn't been done before. You know, Uber took essentially the idea of getting from A to B and blowing that whole thing up by saying, hey, you got your phone. and drivers have a phone. Let's just connect the two. Now, the cab industry was sitting there the whole time. They never thought of this. They were so locked into the way they'd always done cab service. So create is what you have as revolutionary. What you get into is adapt and extend. Okay, these are two kind of different ways of framing some of your ideas or of innovation. Adapt is where you are taking your same kind of service and you're adapting it to an additional audience. So this is kind of like what you've seen with restaurants when they've shifted to their pickup ordering, that maybe they had no, they were sit down, nice restaurant, family restaurant. By shifting to go ordering, they had to adapt in the situation. They're still doing the basic thing that they did. They were still just selling food to people. Extend, I mean, that's what Uber Pool, by the way, is, which is for people that don't have the same amount of dollars. It's more of the carpool type of service. Extend is where you are now taking your current market, your base of people, and you are adding a new service that still plays to your strengths. Uber Eats is a great example of that. They said, again, people want something from A to B. It's food this time. We kind of have them in our market already for Uber. Let's just extend it and say, we're going to. That is a really key one for you to be watching for. With a tongue in cheek, it's kind of what White Market did, right? Hey, we have your seafood, have your toilet paper to come on over. But you're seeing that shift. Now, the manage, which is the incremental, this is what I liken to on the cab companies. All they did was add, payment in the back seat. That wasn't really anything dramatic or changing. And the reason they're getting disrupted is because a revolutionary player came out and disrupted them. When we're in this current state of crisis, my advice to you is if you're getting ideas yourself or from your team members or friends, you should focus on the extend and the adapt quadrants in here. Don't focus so heavily on the risk or the revolutionary, which is the create one, because you don't have a high tolerance for risk right now. You can't take a lot of chances. So focus on the extend and adapt. Ask yourself, what are some of the things that we're really good at, but maybe we haven't been selling or offering? And that's essentially what also, Chad, you're kind of doing by creating those onlines, because you're sharing some aspects about what you're doing in scuba and some tips, but you can't deliver it directly itself. You're trying to adapt to a degree in that same space. And you may find, by the way, new markets as you're doing this that you didn't realize that were out there for you. So keep that in mind. I like this as a visual of just kind of to frame some of how you approach it.
That's great, Bill. And along that line, as we adapt, what are you thinking the lessons and best practices that we're going to take away from this that are going to really change for good how we do business?
So there's a couple that I'm already watching. I think one of those is travel. We were already kind of hearing that a little bit, where by having to move virtually, you're going to see, I think, that the need for traveling physically to other parts of the country or world for some meetings will happen less. I deal with a lot of clients also on the coast and overseas, and they've been ahead, honestly, in the center part of the country about working remotely. It's very commonplace to them. One of the big things that I recommend is you want to see the person's face. You physically seeing that, because what it does is it doesn't replace the entire physical experience, but it does give you a lot more insights into the body language and in the conversations. So I think one is seeing that travel is going to become reduced for certain meetings where people are going to prioritize and ask, do I really need to be there in person? And I'm a big believer of personal interaction, don't get me wrong. But I do think that you see companies that will be able to see and save dollars, but still have the same effects. The second one that I'm seeing is a simple one, and I recommend this for any business. So we're in Zoom here today. My team also uses Microsoft Teams, also an outstanding tool, and we had not really used it much before. We were Skype users. It's very functional, but here's the thing I like about both of these, or any of these kind of platforms, WebEx, GoToMeeting, etc. And so one thing I've already seen, and I'll give an example in my team. So I've got some team members that their job isn't able to be performed the way it was at the office because they're not physically around us or in the office. So we had to look at how do we repurpose some of that skill set and need? Well, one of the things I have with one of my team members who helps me with tons of my content here, as well as our website, is actually doing updates to the website. Now, she knows how to do it. She's the one who's had to do it. Is that the best use of her time when we've got other things like content we're trying to be able to push and get out? Probably not. So the challenge always is, how do I get somebody else to be trained quickly? So what she did was she literally worked on the website and recorded her video, her screen capture here, as she worked through the website, and then saved it and sent it off to the 2 people who were going to teach and how to be able to do that. That to me is really interesting, because it says that for things that are kind of system or procedure based, not the stuff that you need to have a full dialogue or interaction, that's a different kind of conversation. But for things that are very simple for knowledge transfer, how many times have we spent tons of time and effort writing procedure guides, writing all of this stuff, where our whole new generations of millennials and Generation Z are all built on YouTube. So by doing the recording, we can teach them things very quickly, and they can go back at their own time and watch the recording versus having to just all be there at the same time for a class. So that to me is another one that I think operationally we're going to see is going to be a shift.
It's interesting you say that. Heather in our chat box, one of her challenges that she's facing is transforming processes that were already in place into a virtual environment. What you're saying, but essentially probably not going to go back the old school way in a lot of those things.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, I mean, so many companies got hit. I mean, I had companies saying, I got to send people home, and we have desktop computers. We have no IT policy for this. We're concerned about security, all completely valid. It shook and tested how prepared organizations were for adaptation. And I think that what the challenge was also, it helps you to really shake out some of those processes and policies that maybe have been there for a long time, but may not be as relevant or helpful right now. So, and it also then focuses on, these are the ones that are we cannot move on, non-negotiables. I think that brings real clarity to organizations that they will hopefully take out of this. And that's going to put them on a better footing as they move into the future.
Bill, do you see companies moving to a more flexible work environment and allowing more employees work from home and a more of a time span that works for them, if they can do that moving forward?
I think in general, in the industries or sectors where we can, yes. Remote. I had one executive ask me in the first week, if we send everybody to work from home, will they ever come back? Yes, they will. People need human interaction. I think what it will do is it'll allow for us to have a bit more flexibility. Since I've been working on leadership in times of disruption for over a decade now, one of the biggest challenges when you have the speed of change coming at you so fast, which now we're seeing it in steroids, right? But we've been seeing this for years. And this whole notion of uncertainty, what's the new what's the new Uber that's going to be out there, right? One of the things that you've seen has been how well does leadership adapt their organization without losing who they are? And I think that's going to really stress some of these parts of our processes and of our teams to say what is essential and where do we need to adapt. And on the question of working remotely, I think we're going to see more movement for again, not all sectors, but for those that can, more towards deliverable based work, which is what we've been seeing a trend towards anyway. 2, different work times and habits, because people are going to feel more comfortable that if I have a dependency between us, we can actually still communicate and work in this environment and still get it done. And so if you like to work at night, or now we've seen like the witching hour has changed completely because kids are at home, you got to work through that. And I think that sense of adaptability and engagement and understanding the person on the other side, we have been building up to. This has just forced it to happen in a very short period of time.
Another question. So as we're being inundated, you know, Bill, you and I were talking about before that we thought maybe we get some quiet time, but it's been a lot busier. We've been busier through this transition. So how can we and how do we pace ourselves so that we don't get burned out in this process?
Yeah, that's a great one. I tell you, I was sharing with Jennifer that before the call that in the past 5 weeks, I've worked more hours and more days than I have probably in the last 2 or 3 years, because everybody was having needs, right? And we're trying to work through that, and you're trying to also manage your own business and adjust it to where you need to. So there's a couple of things that I think. So I'll give you my sense. My first week, we're shifting, and my team started working that first weekend. So we were already working through ahead of it. So we got through what you've probably heard of, the whole forming, storming, norming, and performing stages of team development. Storming is where everybody's kind of doing this, right? You're kind of locking each other because you like each other, you're moving fast, you're excited about, hey, we're gonna make some adjustments, but then you start colliding. Well, that collision occurred with communication channels. Between text, chat, Teams, Skype, email, phone calls, there's 6 right there. You just don't know how to respond. So one of the things we started really doing is trying to push through storming as fast as we could, was to start to come down to some basic operating rules that we came as agreements in. I'm going to share with you a couple of those. This is a good example, and we actually have, if you're interested, an infographic on this that I'm happy to send to you. But we created our own kind of little what we call guidance, and this was around virtual communications, how not to go insane, because nobody wants to do that. I'm just going to share with you 2 parts of this. We had some tips in here, how to use Teams, how to use certain aspects of email, but the main thing we did was we said we wanted to use Teams as a company internally, and we would use email as our primary for external. It doesn't mean you still don't email internally. It doesn't mean that you still don't text or call someone, but it meant our primary vehicle was going to be Teams for chats. We've actually found that the functionality of it allowed us to bring in SharePoint and what we were doing in a lot of other aspects, and actually just work from Teams for a good portion of our workload. But I have employees that are also heavily engaged on the sales and customer side. They don't have customers that are in Teams necessarily, so they've got to use phone and they've got to use email on that. Then what we did was, this was the really key takeaway here, and I want you to think about this for your own organization if you've moved into a remote environment. We created some basic guidance rules, and we did this for a while. We've also made a couple of adjustments to them as we've gone through these 4+ weeks. So on the left-hand side, it just gives a little bit of a sense to the employee. If we're trying to just kind of discuss a potentially what's going to lead to a decision, but it's not actually the decision, then we may use MS Teams as a channel to pull some people together, some light discussion. If we're going to make a decision, then we're going to do it through a conference call or using Teams. We do a lot of video calls through there. And if it's communicating a decision, like a decision has been made and now we're going to share it with other people, it may be in an email or it may be on our daily stand-up call. Now, the key on the other side of this that was real important was that you see those golden rules, which really weren't hard and fast rules. They're intended to be guidance for the employee. That's hours. Then you need to either text or call, or ask if you need to get like multiple people together. Then we need to text and call and say we're going to get a call on Teams or a meeting on Teams really fast because we need to talk through this. That's a lot better than trying to do this round robin where you try to call and talk to 4 different people and then come up with a decision and then go back to the 4 people and tell them your answer. That doesn't work well in a remote environment. If it's non-urgent, then you can do a couple of different things. You could schedule it. One of the things we found right off the bat was that people stopped scheduling things in their calendar and they just started all chatting or reaching out as soon as they had the thought. And that's what the technology allows you to, and it can be a trick for you as well. And then if you're scheduling a meeting, what we got is great feedback from our employees that have younger kids was, please don't hold 1 hour or 30-minute meetings. Give us 10 minutes or 5 minutes in those meetings to have that bio break, to be able to check in on the kids, to make what you're trying to do is you're trying to listen to that and say, do I need to adjust a little bit of my time scale and create that environment that we can start to remove or push down some of the noise and communicate and operate at a more efficient level. So that's just what we did. Like I said, if you're interested, I'll send it to you, Jennifer. You can send it out to the team. But we've got a great little guidance piece. It's a little infographic that we've learned from that may provide some value for you all as well.
Fantastic. Anyway, did we cover how can we turn this in? I didn't know if you had a specific slide about this, about really making sure that we turn this disruption into an opportunity.
Yeah, so that was kind of earlier as I was showing around the 4 quadrants. That's right. Yep.
That's what I want to make sure we hit that, because that was, and I think really, what are we going to be able to learn from this crisis to make sure that we're a better leader coming out the end of this, to get back, when we get back things to normal?
Yeah, I think that to me, we're going to learn a couple of different things. We're first going to learn what matters most. And I'm talking from the leadership side first. So we're going to learn what matters most. The second is, I think we're going to learn where we had some gaps, almost like kind of shaking off the cobwebs of something that was really old and you're trying to figure out, is it even work anymore? We're going to find out the parts that work really well and don't work so well in our organizations. The question then is going to become, what do we do next? I think then as a people side, as an employee, we're also going to learn what matters most. And you're seeing employees have to shift their priorities with their home life and trying to balance that. You know, one of the things for me is, as Jennifer alluded, it's really easy to get stuck here behind a screen or a desk and be working all day. My wife reached out and said, okay, we're going to do 15-minute walks at least once a day. And so she scheduled it right into my calendar. And I recommend that, by the way, if you're feeling overwhelmed, schedule breaks into your calendar. I had to replace my commute time, which is for a lot of us, that was kind of a mental time, just being in the car, being able to think. So I have that now, but I have it over my coffee down in the kitchen every morning, or through a walk into the end of the day. And so think about for yourself, what are those things that are really important to you? The second that I would add is going to be from an employee side is employees are going to judge. They're going to give grace, but they're going to judge their leadership teams for how they handled the situation and cared for them. People go to work, I get it, for money. They get it for title sometimes. They get it for learning. I get all that. But in the end, people do want to know that they're cared for, or that their families are going to be cared for. And that's going to be very important. That's why I said that kind of at the outset of, I know it is hard. We're balancing bottom lines and balance sheets. We're trying to figure. But in the end, they're going to remember you for how you treated and handled them through the situation. Not that you had all the answers, but that they had confidence and trust in you taking them through this.
Great. So we've got a couple of extra minutes. Want to take any more questions?
Sure.
Do you want to chat it? Do you?
Yeah, no. If anybody has any other questions or needs that you'd love for me to kind of either share or try to respond on what I'm hearing as some best practices, please do so. Go ahead and type that into the chat. While you're doing that, if I may, Jennifer, I was going to share, for you all aware in this call, one of the things we've been doing, we've had to adapt. We are shifting into delivering what we call some micro sessions as Persimmon. There's 3 of them that we're offering. The first one starts tomorrow and 2 are next week. And if these are interested in your organization, these are $45 per session. They're being done virtually. The first one I'm doing is around keeping your team aligned in a virtual work environment. And the focus of that session is going to be as a leadership team, not just focusing on what people are working on, but how are they making decisions and how do they take actions? And I'm going to teach a technique in there that you can apply immediately to your team, and you're going to actually work on your team in the session. That's going to allow you to be able to improve the judgment and the decision-making in remote environments, because you can't see everybody all day like you can in the office. The second one that we're doing next week is taught by our president, Sarah Gallagher, and hers is focusing on doing collaboration in remote or virtual environments. We've been facilitating everything from requirements to process sessions, and how do you do that in a virtual environment when you've got people all over the country that need to be engaged on that. And then lastly, we're going to do, and each of these, by the way, are an hour. The last one is around really self-care at the end of next week, and it's going to be focusing on what are we doing, kind of to Jennifer's question a couple of questions back, which was how aspect, just taking all of this pressure and being okay with that. So with that, I want to open it up if there's any other questions. So
There hasn't been typed yet. I have one.
Okay.
And here Mike's got one, so then I'll save mine. Mike, do you think that clients will continue to perceive as much value from their contractors if they can only be served virtually?
So it depends on what kind of contractor you're meaning. Do you mean in that space, like as in something you're doing in a normal office, or is it more like as in a trade? Mike? Sorry, Mike, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, well, I'm an engineer, so I do engineering stuff. So
yep, okay.
It can be done it's done in an office, but I'm just used to working with people. The more you can get hands-on, there's much more. You feel much more. That's the part I'm concerned, is that you're gonna do.
Yeah, we're gonna lose that.
The touch value, it's just a phrase I came up with. But.
Yeah. So short answer is, I believe that people absolutely, so I will tell you what I've seen over 5 weeks now is you're still seeing companies use contractors and employees that can in remote environments. I think the key is, my recommendations are using virtual wherever you can. It sharpens up the clarity about what each side may own or owe each other and how we have dependencies. But I have seen even my own team. So I have team members that do contract type work for clients, delivering projects, both on the IT and on the construction side of the house. They're still doing that. And actually, one of the things that we found, one of the reasons we tried to push our team quickly through that storming phase using Teams and some of these technologies that I've shared, the reason we did that was we wanted to be ahead of some of our customers so we could help coach them through that in addition to our day job of what we're working on. And we're seeing that happen. So that even builds more of that kind of relationship, because not only are we doing our job, but we're also kind of helping their team get better performance in the remote environment. So I absolutely agree and believe in that as well. Jennifer, you said you had one more too?
I did, and it's really, for me, I think one of the challenges that I've had is, and it goes to the innovation, and is really taking time and putting it aside to make sure you're moving the organization forward, even though we're being completely disrupted. So do you have any any things you can recommend, any tricks, tools of the trade?
Yeah, so a couple of things I would recommend that I found them to work really well is, don't assume that every gathering that you do here has to be a meeting like we traditionally think of in the office. Having a happy hour is just fun. I'll tell you, it's fun. Playing Fibbage or using Jackbox TV. My family, we've used even what's called boardgamearena.com is a good one. You can play board games with people from all over the country. My parents in Enid have joined in. My son in Seattle has joined in. So that can be fun to kind of create that, how do we work as a team? But the second I would really recommend is set up, if you haven't, a weekly lunch or some sort of a gathering. It doesn't have to have a whole purpose. It doesn't need to have a purpose at all. It's just getting people together to see each other, because some people are more introverted. They're okay working from home. They're like, hey, this actually works great for me. Others are like, I'm dying here because I can't see and touch and hug people, right? Or whatever that may be for them. And that's a hard part in this particular. You want to just reach across and give them that hug, you can't. And so think about how you can approach the sense of just bringing people together for the sake of together. That will pay off dividends inside your organization as you move forward as well. So,
All right.
For those that are still one thing that would help me, I would love just to hear one last question for the chat. If there's one word that kind of gave you, that you think of the value from today that really stuck with you, that helped you, something that hit you, what would that be from today's call? I'm constantly looking for feedback and saying, what's resonating, what's helping you all out with value, and would love that. So, and there's a hi in there as well. So, so if you would, thank you. And I thank you, Jill, for noting that. We got support came in. Bethany, thank you. Yeah, if you would add that. Take advantage of this time. I love some of the comedians that have been sharing about how, we all wish we could have more time with our family. We all wish we could have more time at home, and then we get it. And now we're trying to figure out our balances, right? I think it's been really wild seeing how, as a society, we're adapting.
Is it just me, or did he pause? But everyone shade there. Okay, he's frozen. All right. Will, I hate to lose Bill.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go. Okay.
Oh,
now
sorry.
you're
I
back.
just had a blip on my end. Sorry. I was just saying, all of this reminds us that we're human. And my main advice as you kind of go forward is recognize you're going to make mistakes. Give yourself grace as well as other people. Bring people together to try to solve those solutions, and be willing to and be open-minded to hear from your team. How do we come at this? That's how innovation occurs. That's how we get better. It's how we adapt. And it's how we will come out of this stronger as a people.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I like sincerity. Bill said sincerity, what adaptability, adapt, and evolution, support.
Awesome.
So we're definitely going to come out stronger from all of this. Thank you for all of you joined. Bill, thank you again for your fantastic insight. We're thankful for the Persimmon Group. You have an incredible team there that supports us in so many ways, both from the chamber and our entire business community. So thanks for your investment into our members today.
Awesome. Thank you all very much for having me, and have a great week and weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Broken Arrow. Mr. Malega, good to see you.